I went in my daughter's classroom a couple of days, I think, after the election. And I walked in, I don't know, she forgot something. And so I walked in and all the kids were like, hey, and they were smiling at me and everything. And I just felt this sense of just anger and sadness because I was like, they don't even know what we're about to endure in terms of what it like. I'm standing in the school building. They don't understand like the fundamental like dismantling of their education that is about to happen. And so I felt like all these different feelings, and they're just like sitting there smiling at me because they're so innocent and they don't know.
And like you want them to have that bubble.
And you want them to, but I just had never had a feeling like that. And so, yeah, this is the reason why I do this is to amplify, like, for the people who may not have the opportunity to like read the paper because, you know, paywalls, or the time, or like, this is, I think, my and the other people who are involved in this show, like, this is our way of like doing our small part to get information out to people in a way that is digestible. So I appreciate you for taking the time out. I know, you know, you have a super busy schedule just in regular life. You're one of my neighbors, and I see you all the time on the neighborhood thread telling people about all kinds of things. Like, when people have questions, I feel like you're always there and you always have an answer. And I wanted to say that first about you because I moved into the neighborhood a couple years ago.
Welcome.
And thank you. And it's just, I think that there is a great sense of like camaraderie. And I think that it takes people like taking on that as their role. Like, I think everybody has different roles in this life or assignments or whatever. And I always just see you showing up for our neighbors. And so first I want to say that to you and welcome you to the show.
Thank you.
Everybody, we've been talking for a couple minutes, but today we have Kate Curry-Da-Souza on the show. We have her on the show because she is running for the open city council seat. And she's here to talk to us about her vision if she is elected and her work in Columbus. I want to ask you about your background, all of those things. So thank you for coming, chatting with us.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Excited to be here.
Yeah. So.
And I do really appreciate having equitable spaces for people to hear about news, because it is about having different entry points, right? Because not all people get news from the same spaces, right? Paywalls are a big part of that. I mean, how many times have you looked at something and you're like, okay, I've hit my limit for this month of how many times I go.
Right. Now I don't know what happened in my neighborhood.
Right. And so,
it's not on Reddit yet.
That's not good, you know? So I appreciate that you do this so that people can hear different points of view.
Of course. It's just my little way of like,
no, I don't think it's
tapping into
Don't diminish that. I don't think you should diminish that. I think that that's a big thing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that.
And that's really honest. And I think that also as neighbors and as women, like we have to be able to really rise up into spaces like that, because I think that that's a powerful space that you have, and you know a lot of people and you continue to know more people, and that opens doors and windows and seats at tables for many more people to come after you. And you're not the kind of person to like shut spaces after you walk in. So I appreciate that you do that. So
I appreciate that.
Thank you for having me here today.
And this show started as like, I see this show as a show for like my people, right? That we didn't necessarily have an outlet that was going to like celebrate the joy that we have in the city, the things that we're doing, but also be critical about the things that we could be doing better. And so like that is how this started, and it's become like not just it's definitely always going to be a Black centered show because I am a Black woman and I like do center like the things that are important to us, but there are so many different kinds of people from all over a different whatever spectrum, not just on the identity spectrum, but that listen to this show now because they have an appreciation of the perspective. Because I don't try to be objective. Like, it is what it is sometimes. And sometimes you just got to say the thing, you know? And I appreciate being able to have people on the show who are actively involved in the community. Like, I don't feel like you fell out the sky and she's running for city council. Who is that? Like, I already knew who you were because you're already involved in the community. So thank you for being that person. And how I always like to start the show is I like to ask people about their background. Like, I know you're from Lorain.
Well, born in Oberlin.
Okay. Born in Oberlin? Okay.
Born in Oberlin because it was the hospital my mom wanted to go to, but raised outside of Oberlin.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Did your parents work at the university or?
No.
Okay.
No.
Okay. Yeah.
So I was raised outside of Oberlin. So born in Oberlin because it was the best quote unquote hospital, according to my mom. No shade to the Wellington Hospital, which is now closed. But I was raised outside of Wellington, so 10 miles to the nearest town, no sidewalks, no streetlights, small. Okay. My dad was a teacher before I was born, led a teacher's strike. Didn't go the way that he wanted it to. My parents were not from there. My dad had been in the Peace Corps. They had taught in Australia. They ended up in Wellington for a teaching job. And then my dad started a machine shop in the 80s when the Reagan era happened, and there was like a big economic downturn. They hardly made it, but they did. And so I was raised there. Mm-hmm. So that is where I'm from originally.
So it sounds like you had some pretty one thing I think that's cool about people's parents who have been able to like go places like for whatever reason, like sounds like your dad had that ability because of the Peace Corps, and had the opportunity to be exposed to people that were different from him. Like, how do you think that informed how they parented you and like how you ended up seeing how you see the world now, if at all?
Well, yeah, I'm sure it very much informed my worldview. Because we had friends from a lot of different places that would come and visit us. I can remember taking a trip to DC to visit his friend who was like the head librarian for all of the libraries in Malaysia. And so we had gotten to meet her, I was like, I think 8. And I didn't realize how important she was until I was much older, because I just knew her as like this auntie. And then we went to like Niagara Falls, and I was like really excited about like haunted houses until I had to go to one, and I was very creeped out. My dad made me go through the whole thing. He was like very strict. But anyway, I had a single dad. My mom left when I was a kid. And so my dad raised me. And it was kind of a little bit of a hard scrabble because he had this business that was really hard to manage, and he was the owner, but he did it. And then he got remarried when I was like 11, to a really wonderful person. But I came from a really close-knit community that's very rural, but in many ways is very much like the community that I live in now, where people pay attention to what's going on next door. It's like, when we moved in to our house now, I told my next door neighbor, like, because I already have an older son, I was like, if you see him doing something he's not, like, spank him and send him home, and I'll deal with the rest, like, for real, because I'm a pretty old school parent. And she's like, oh, people don't do that anymore. And I was like, well, we do. And so seriously, like, that's kind of how I grew up, and people looked out for one another. And that's the way my neighborhood is now. Like, our neighbors are wonderful. They've lived there for an eon, and they have welcomed people in, and they watch out for one another.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
They called me one time when our basketball hoop was like walking down the alley, and they're like, "Did you know your basketball hoop's walking away?" And I was like, "Oh, okay." So I went and got it and told him he needed to bring it back. And I was like, "I'm Miss Kate, and don't do that. You can come play basketball here anytime, but the hoop stays." And so, it's kind of old fashioned like that, but that's part of the beauty of living in a neighborhood where people look out for one another. And so,
yeah. And I'm glad that you said that, because there's been a couple times where I've had to like do the same things with people, like lovingly be like, "No, we're not going to do that."
Right.
Like, but you are my neighbor.
Yeah.
I'm not going to call the cops on you.
No.
Because I don't want you to do it to me.
Right.
I understand what that looks like too, right? And so it's this, I think that does make a neighborhood where you can like be in community with people like in a loving way, but you can also hold people accountable when folks need to be held accountable. And like these are the norms in our neighborhood. Like, let's not do those types of things, because
I think that there's room to make mistakes.
Yeah,
especially with kids, right? But that there's like a self-correcting space. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's...
And it can be safe.
Correct. Mm-hmm. And so for like my sons, like there has been that, right? Mm-hmm. Where like our next door neighbor has taught my older son how to do yard work and like how the proper way to trim hedges and like how to ask for money when you're like doing yard work. So it's not just, he would do it for free, but they're like, "No, you have to add, this is a paid gig. You need to be, your time is worth things. Like you earned this, like you're worth this." And so like to show kids that they're worthy of like, and they're valuable, like to have somebody besides their family pouring into them matters. Like, that just to engage them in conversation and to like show them that they're cared about and watched and people are looking out for them beyond just even their nuclear family matters.
And somebody's looking out for you even when you don't think someone's. Because that was how the neighborhood 100%. That I grew up in was. Like, even when you thought no one was looking at you, someone was all like, my grandparents' house, Miss Mann, she lived next door, and she was like 80 years old by the time I was born. And she used to sit in the window. And you knew if you did something wrong, she was going to call over to my grandparents who were like 50. So they were like babies to her and let her know. Yeah. And then they were going to tell my mom. And then there was going to be a whole thing,
and then
you know?
Get in trouble like 3 times over.
Yeah.
I was always the one running in a dress, getting sat down at church because I was running in a dress. And my dad was like, "What are you doing?" And,
we recognized how like some of that was like, it was too much, but also like we need some of that back.
Well, but also like, I'm extremely grateful for that. And I have been at least blessed to be able to go back to my parents' home church and be able to go back to my godparents and tell them like, because sometimes you miss those opportunities to be able to tell people thank you because they're gone. Right. Yeah. But I've been able to go back and say thank you. Like there's skills that I have that I learned from people, sewing and small stuff, but things that have made me, because I often didn't have money to do stuff, but that I was more self-sufficient. And so to be able to say thank you for teaching me those things, because it has made things possible. Right. And then I was able to then show my kids how to do these things. Right. But sometimes just the opportunity to say thanks. Right.
Yeah.
And so, but that's also part of being community. And I firmly believe in that. And so when we moved to the Near East Side, because when we moved to Columbus was 2001. But when I moved to the Near East Side was 2011. And so being part of that community has been so vital to my life. Like we've just really it's just been really like, we got to settle in and really be part of something much bigger than us. Yeah. And for my younger son, it's the only home he's ever known. He's never had to move. And so when we talk about, with my older son, we talk about how many different houses we had to live in and how many times we moved. And like my younger son is like, "Hey, you moved? Like,
right.
You lived in an apartment? Like you lived not on the first floor. You didn't have a yard?" Like it's so foreign to him because he's been so privileged to have just had one home and like just have one dad that's like, we're still married, right? We're still together. And so he just doesn't have a concept of what that looks like.
His life has had a lot of continuity.
Oh.
Yeah.
That's all he's
that's
had,
all
right?
And so that's a good thing.
That's a good. I mean, it's a blessing, but it's just like very different than his older brother. So it's just It just looks different,
right? So. And it's great to like. I know you mentioned like your mom leaving and stuff. I had some of the same sort of chaos in my life early, and that is not how my family is. Like we've created a lot of stability for my daughter, and I'm always like really happy and like proud of that. Like no matter things happen, no matter what happens, it's like the attempt was made to like have a lot of stability for her and to also like have her in a place, like because we're talking about place and we're talking about community where there's a lot of like I think shared values. And I think like in Columbus, I think that Columbus neighborhoods don't always get the credit that they deserve for being like good places to live and have the opportunity to raise a family. Like, because I mean, even if you look at our neighborhood, there's not a ton of kids. There's a lot of well,
not anymore,
right? Because which we'll talk about gentrification and displacement. But there it's first of all, it doesn't have to be that way, and it shouldn't be that way,
of course.
But I remember when we were moving from our old neighborhood, and we would put the for sale sign out, and we would be outside standing out there. People would always come by because we moved from within Columbus to obviously another Columbus neighborhood, and people would always say, well. They would see my daughter like in a stroller and stuff. Well, where are you guys moving to? New Albany or Upper Arlington or Pickerington or Reynoldsburg or something like that? And we'd be like, no, we're moving within Columbus. And it was like this whole conversation about schools and et cetera, et cetera. And I just think like, again, like things change because your kids' needs change and your needs may change. Obviously, we know the school district is what it is right now, but like I think I always wanted to be like deeply rooted as best as I could in the place where we settled. And so I'm glad that we're having this conversation in this way, because I think that it is a good illustration of like the things that people are experiencing every day when they're living in Columbus. It's not what you're always seeing, amplified about the bad things in Columbus. Like it has its challenges for sure.
Well, I think that's everywhere, but I also think that the districts didn't exist when I moved here in 2001, but like, what is District 7 now? I've lived in...
Yeah, talk about that.
Right? Like, so what is District 7 now? I've lived in... So when I moved here in 2001, I lived in Victorian Village. And then I lived in Short North / Vic Village. And we lived for 1 year in Clintonville, which we did not... was not our favorite, and we moved right back to Harrison West. But we had needed to financially regroup, and we had a friend who had a place there, so we went there. So when we moved to Harrison West, and then I got a housing voucher, and so I was able to live as a single parent back in Vic Village. And then I graduated from college, and so then I was paying full rent, and I was dating my now husband, and I was like, okay, well, this is crazy. We're both paying full rent. We shouldn't probably do this. Yeah. So then we moved to Old Town East for a second, and we had started looking for places to live. We'd already taken the housing class through the Urban League. And so we started looking for places to purchase. And then it took us between May and October to close on our house. And so, well, technically between July and October to close on our house. So, so then that's where we've lived ever since. So all that time, except for 1 year, I've lived in District 7.
Yeah.
And so, but every neighborhood we've lived in, we've had great neighbors. We've had great neighbors everywhere we've lived. Like we really have, like, every place I've lived, we've had good people to live next door to. We've had people who looked out. Like, even when we were in the Short North, we were the only people who lived in our building who had a kid. But the people who lived behind us had this like really amazing garden, and they'd let our kid, my older son, just like totally wreck it. And every person who walked through that alley, they would let like come be in their garden and just sit and like enjoy the flowers. And like that went through its own gentrification, which was really like a day that they just paved Paradise, and everybody grieved it when they did that when that landlord did it. But anyway, but the people who were there were really great. And so I can't say enough about how many great people we've lived next to. But I think that also it's about how you build community where you live. And I think it's about
and you can build community anywhere.
Yeah.
Literally
absolutely.
anywhere. And I want to like go back to something that you said, because I think that I want to know how you mentioned that you had a housing voucher and you were a single mom.
Mm-hmm.
How does that inform like what you plan to do as a member of city council if elected? Like how does something like that like inform your view of the world and of the city of Columbus?
Columbus should have housing for everyone. Housing is a human right. And I firmly believe that we should make sure that there are housing opportunities at every different level. And we should make sure that those opportunities exist in neighborhoods and not just have it where we're pushing things out to the outer edges of everything, right? When we looked at when Poindexter got pulled down, folks got moved really far out away from resources.
Yeah.
And so that's not helpful for people who need resources, who need access to bus lines, who needed access to the jobs that they had, where they needed access to the schools that their kids were already totally invested in, and they were part of the community here. Mm-hmm. So we really need to be thinking about how we find housing opportunities that are much closer and within the communities here, right? Yeah. That they're already invested in.
Right.
For me, I had been on the housing list for a long time. It had predated when I was not single, but I had gotten divorced in the meantime. And because it takes you a really long time to get through the housing list, by the time my number had come up, I was at that point then a single parent. Mm-hmm. And I'm really grateful that I got a housing voucher. It helped me finish college. The Access program, it's now called the Access Collaborative, but run by Tracy Lewis, could not have finished college without that. That is a DEI initiative.
Yeah.
Could not have finished college without that. I'm extremely grateful for that. Mm-hmm. It helps all kinds of people. And, I'm just really grateful. And I think that perspective, I bring that with me because I recognize that people have goals at every different level. And just because people can minimize and diminish a person because they can say, well, you're low income, and they'll say, well, that's not their dream, or that's not their, they don't have they'll dismiss people. And that is so wrong. Mm-hmm. We need to be building people up so that they have opportunities so that they can achieve what they're looking to do. Mm-hmm. And instead of building more and more barriers so that they can't get to that by making them have things that are sometimes outside of the purview of Columbus City Council, but things that are like extra work and, work requirements for Medicaid, which is also, I believe, health insurance is like health access is also a human right, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. But when we bury people under these different requirements, we're not making it where they have equitable access to what I believe is a human right.
Right.
And that's not the society that I want to see us living in. I don't think that that's the place that we can make Columbus. Columbus is a place that we can do all kinds of things that make it where people can achieve what they want to achieve. But we need to make sure that people have access to the basics. And the basics are housing and healthcare and great jobs and careers, right? Mm-hmm. And food security. Mm-hmm. And so we can think collectively and think differently about how we get to those resources. It doesn't have to maybe be the way that we've done it in the past. But having, if you've ever been hungry, you go and look at the person's shelves. The first thing they do when they have a paycheck is they buy canned goods. Right. So that's just how they buy food, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because they don't want their family. If you've ever not had your electric on, you got a lot of Jesus candles in your house. Like because you never want to chance not having those resources, because you know what it's been like if you haven't had some of those things in your past life.
Yeah.
So, we can move forward, but there's always going to be an aspect of you carrying some of that baggage because you've had instability in your past.
Right. It never, that's one of those things that I think just like never leaves you, which is why I asked you that question, because I think that a lot of people will resonate with your experience, seeing where you are now, right? Too, because I always want to make people understand that like anybody should be able to run for office. No matter if you had a voucher right now, you should be able to run for office.
Why wouldn't you?
You should be the person running for office, because
Absolutely.
you have the lived experience of what it means to be in a city that everyone is saying is thriving, and we're seeing people thriving.
You're
right?
A resident, not even just a citizen. I mean, like a citizen as in not like a U.S. citizen. Like you're a resident.
Yes,
you live here.
you're a resident, and so I think that it's great to hear about people's stories so that people understand that there's no like monolith in terms of who should be involved in our democratic processes in this city. I wanted to ask you too, I know you were involved for years on the Near East side, on the council.
Near East Area Commission.
Yeah, Near East Area Commission. So I wanted to just kind of ask you about your experience, why you joined. So yeah, I wanted to give you a little space to talk about that.
So I think that it's helpful. The commissions are representative. They make recommendations, right? Mm-hmm. So there's now 21 of them. There didn't used to be. And NEAC, the Near East Area Commission, goes by NEAC, has been around since 1979. So it's one of the older commissions. But there's been an opportunity to be able to utilize technology, to be able to make sure that the meetings are videotaped, and streamed, and that the agendas are published online and minutes are available online, because recognizing that lots of people are very busy and they are not always going to be able to attend a meeting in person, right? Because people are just so busy with jobs and 2 jobs, but that maybe people can tune in, or they might be able to watch on the bus later, right? Or later at a different time. But because there's been so much development on the Near East Side, it was just such a shame to not have people be aware of the development that was happening, and recognizing that there were so many neighbors who were so concerned about, their homes many of them had already experienced eminent domain taking their childhood homes, right? And they'd already had a lot of racist experiences from that experience, right? And so fully acknowledging that that's where people have come from, that there's a lot of fear and worry, and that can take up a lot of time and space in your life when you have that just hanging over you. And so if it means that you can dispel some of it by just making sure that they have access to the information so that they can feel included, because then if they know what's going on, they can give testimony, right? That they can give feedback. They can say, okay, well, this is this project that's coming up. I hate it. Or this project actually isn't going to be so bad. I actually support it. But just to be part of the process, right? Like that's the democratic process.
Right.
And so folks had just really felt not included in it. So that is why I had not wanted to join the commission. My younger son was 4, my older son was 15, and I had not felt like I had to. I'm always working full time, at least, if not more, because my husband and I are still trying to make it, right?
Yeah.
Childcare is really expensive.
Hell yeah.
And it didn't get any less expensive, right?
Ago.
Like it didn't get less expensive as we've got.
It's only going up.
Right. And so, and because I had started out as a pretty young parent, we never had this like, oh, we're going to be 30 something before we have, or not that maybe you're more prepared when you're 30 something, but like I didn't have like the leisure of like, I say leisure, I'm using that very loosely, no judgment, but like I didn't have that experience of like going off to college without any other responsibilities besides myself. And then eventually having a kid, like,
right. That's just not
my
trajectory went.
And so I've never had that like super financial.
Yeah.
We've made it, right? But it's taken a different path.
Yeah.
So I just didn't feel like I had the time capacity. But when I went to the meetings and I was like, oh, okay, well, I can maybe help with this. So I joined as a community member on the committee, and then my community voted me into the commission, and then I just kind of started.
And then you became chair.
And then eventually I became chair.
Yeah.
So I spent 3 years as chair. And in that time frame, like when I left in December, there's now a young woman. Because we created a position in the bylaws for a young adult engagement seat. So she joined, she's an East High School student. She's the student council president. And I think it's so wonderful to have youth on the commission. NEAC's always allowed for 16-year-olds, to my knowledge, to join the commission. But to have somebody really informing the commission of her perspective, and for her to be able to pull perspective from East High School is huge. And then also to have other individuals who've lived in the Near East Side for, decades.
Right.
And maybe to even be from multiple generations of experience on the Near East Side, I think is really important.
For sure.
And at this point, all of the people who are on the commission actually live on the Near East Side. So even the at-large seats. And a couple of them live in public housing. Some of them are renters. So it's
giving voice to everyone who is in the neighborhood.
It's also like a wide range of people. There might be some retirees, but there's also a student, right? Like, so it's like
the span of life, right? And perspectives.
Correct. And I think that's really important because you want it to be representative of the neighborhood that it's serving.
Oh, sure.
And so I'm really proud of that work that we collectively did, and, the updating of the bylaws, and to make sure that committees were full of community members, because there are community seats on the Near East Area Commission. And so community members can just can ask the chair of the committee to join, and they get to vote on that committee. So you get to have more voice for the community on those seats. We should be occupying public buildings. They're ours. We pay taxes for those.
Yeah,
we should be occupying spaces where we can influence decisions that affect our communities. We should be occupying that as much as possible. And so to make sure that we have voices from our community, from elders, from other individuals that are coming in, because then you can have influence from elders for younger people who are moving in, or maybe who've already lived there, but that intergenerational space to be able to have that conversation.
It's so important.
Of course.
It's so important. And I think that is like so cool that you have a young person, because the youth voice is often the one people think that like kids are not people.
They're totally people.
And
no, it's really important.
And so it's a really I always think that's interesting, but I'm glad that you all kind of rolled up your sleeves and like made the changes that you thought needed to happen in this point in time, right?
Yeah.
So Near East Area Commission, you're on it.
I was.
You were on
December.
It, right? Yeah. You're on it, and you decide. How did you decide? I now want to run for city council. Why now?
Well, so it kind of kept coming up from people prodding about it again, but it has to be a conversation. Like, it was a conversation with my partner, like my husband and I had to really talk about it, and it kept coming up, and then we kept talking about it, and then it was a conversation with my kids. Like, my older son is now 23, so he was 22 and he was in college, and he's living life, right? Like, he graduated in December.
Yeah.
But as a young adult, you're like, well, okay, I need you to make great life choices because this is a family decision. And then for my younger son, are you comfortable with this? Because, I want to make sure that this is not going to negatively affect your childhood. And this could be very public, right? Because public service is not the way that it used to be.
No.
And I need this to be a safe decision for our family. And so we just had to really think about, and then what does it do to your career? Is this where and then you have to do an ego check. Like, why am I doing this? And wanting to make sure that it is in constant service to the community. because at the end of the day, I really want to make sure that I am doing this for the right reasons.
Yeah.
So then coming back to elders in the community and making sure that, and other people that I check in with to say like, this is what I'm hearing. This is where we're at. And this is what we're thinking about. And this is what we're being told. And what do you think? And, then you're hitting a lot of, yes, please, let's go. Sure. We think this is right. And why is this taking so long for you to make this decision? We've told you already. So, okay. So
I feel like
it's a big decision because it's a big decision. I'm joking a little bit, but I mean, like, they know it was a big decision and they knew that I was taking it really seriously. And they knew that also, like, if I didn't decide to do it, they weren't mad, but they also knew that I had to, like, my husband and I had to make this decision because.
Are you a Libra?
Yeah.
Are you serious?
Yeah.
Oh my God, that's so funny. Because I do the same thing. It's like we have an overthinking, like, and I don't even say it's overthinking. It's like before I do something, even if I'm like buying something, I have to look at every single review. Like I have to be really sure about the decision that I'm about to make. So all the questions that you just ran down to me, they were questions that you had, even just about safety, right? Because running for office is not what it used to be. And I think that it's like so important to hit on the ego piece, because I think that like we're in this space right now where people do not trust the political process, just like across the board. It's not just in Columbus, but it's at the state level and the federal level that people have this distrust in institutions. Mm-hmm. And so that was a question that I had for you too, is like, what are your plans, you as yourself, as a person who perhaps might be on council, to help like start that trust restoration process, or like continue that work? Because I don't want to say that like no one's doing that work now, or no one's thinking about it, but I definitely think that people don't feel as though when they're voting for different positions within Columbus that they're being represented, or that their vote actually matters. I think people don't think that I think in general, people don't believe their votes matter, because we look at the voter turnout, right? For the election, sure. Right? Sure. The voter turnout was not what it should have been. Right. But that has a piece that has to do with trust, right? Yeah, and we 100%. See it trickle down to the local level. People have conversations with me all the time around like, we feel like everyone that's on council is handpicked. Like these are conversations that I hear all the time, and I'm always asked to ask those questions. And so like, I want to know your perspective on that, and like, how do you plan to within your sphere of influence change that perspective?
And I was smiling because we've had a lot of my husband and I have had a lot of conversation about this because, and this was part of it, was that like we have jobs, right? Like I have a job I love and I'm here representing myself, but like, when you're doing something that you love, you're like, well, do I want to disrupt this thing that I'm doing that I feel like I can actually make a difference to do something else, right? Mm-hmm. Like, but I had kind of hit this point with the commission where I'm like, I can't do we can't do what we really need to do with this. Like we've hit this critical we've hit this barrier and we can't do more because this is created to only do this, right? Mm-hmm. Like in order to do more, we have to do something different, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that we hit that all the time in our lives. Like, in order to do more, you had to get a different kind of training, or in order to do more, you decided to become a parent, or in order to do more, you decided to pursue a different relationship, people have that all the time, right? Mm-hmm. Or in order to do more, you broke up with the relationship you were in, like, or you stopped being friends with somebody, or you decided to pursue a different religion. I mean, people do that all the time. That's not new. But it's also like this really hard point where like you've done this thing for so long, it's sometimes agonizing to move from this thing that you've been doing to like move to something else, right? And that's that tension point, right? Yeah. But I think that that's that point where you can really see growth, right? And you can really see something different. And for me, I was like, okay, well, here we are. We're at that point where we're going to do something different. And for me, all I have is the reputation that I've built, right? Like all I have is this thing that we've been building. I'm not independently wealthy. Like all I have is this name. Like my family's not originally from Columbus. Like,
right.
But I'm a mom and I'm a wife and I'm an employee and I work for things that are important to me. And I'm a member of a community that's really important to me. And I'm a friend. And I show up when I'm needed and I'm called for and I try to help. Right. So I would not want to jeopardize those things by coming incorrectly to an office and not honoring those things when I come to serve the community. And so
what you're saying is you're not going to get on there and switch up from the person that you are and the way that you've always shown up.
What would I bet? There would be no benefit to that because that would be so disrespectful to the people who've lent their credibility to me and put their names on my petition, who've lent credibility to back me to this point. Like I'm running independently because of that. Like because I want to answer to the community. And so what are the plans, right? The plans are having regular times within the community where people will be able to access me. Like when I joined the commission, one of the first things I did was we put on the commission website my personal telephone number and my email address. Like I meant that when I wanted people to be able to communicate with me. Like, and people called. Sometimes I had to like, okay, I'm answering on my lunch break, but like, let's talk tonight after 5:00 when I'm off work, right? Like we can have a longer conversation, but we will talk. And we did, because that's honoring the community that you're called to serve and that you said you would when they elected you into the commission seat. I mean, that's right. That's you living there and that's you being accountable to that. Because also sometimes elders have said, I heard you say that and I don't like that. Or I want you to rethink that answer. And I would like you to consider this other perspective. And it takes you then going home and feeling a little sweaty and thinking about it and then tossing and turning and then realizing there was another opportunity for you to have growth. That growth is not always going to be comfortable, but that's what we owe our community and what we owe to ourselves in order to be better. And I think that sometimes when we make a bubble that's too thick, where we don't have that place where people can push on us to be better, then that's not healthy. Yeah. And so my plan, and this is the same, there was a little bit of a question kind of like this in the interview when we'd had the screening for the appointment, which is like, how do you connect with the community? It's like, if people are in encampments, I'll go to the encampments. I worked in children's services. Like that doesn't faze me. Because if you have a parenting plan and people are in an encampment, you go visit the parents where the parents are at, because that is your obligation to the law to make sure people get visited and they know what's going on with their kids. That is your duty. And if the duty is to all the residents of Columbus, then we need to make sure that we are accessible to people so that they can give us their feedback and that they know where we are so we can be accountable to that. Yeah. Maybe that means that we have meetings in outside spaces and we don't have everything down at City Hall and the meetings move from place to place so people have more access to the city council.
It sounds like you're willing to be creative. Like what you just said, you're willing to do some things that haven't been traditionally done on council or ways of operating. And also honoring like what people know, right? Like this is what the people in the community are saying. Like they know better than, we're all citizens, right? The people on council are citizens. They live in Columbus too, but there's something about listening to people with less power than you that is how you get to the solutions that will actually work.
I would push back on saying that they have less power, because I don't think that I think that all people have power.
Oh, sure.
I think that we also collectively have a lot of power.
Oh, yeah.
And I also think that many times people don't recognize the power that we have inside of ourselves. And often we're told we don't have power, but actually you have a tremendous amount of power. As we talked about earlier, like you have built this into something that now people are like looking for, right? Because you have a way of like connecting with people, right?
Yeah. No, and I agree with you on that. When I'm saying power, I'm talking about the shift of like power from the place that, especially, and I think about power too as the spectrum. So like, if you're from a marginalized community like me, and there's my marginalization is also on a spectrum, right? Like I am not necessarily the most marginalized person. And so when I say that, that's more so what I mean.
I hear you.
Not that I think that as a collective, like we have so much power, and like the power is really in our hands, and it's how it's us starting to like really understand how we can organize and wield that type of power. That's more so what I meant by that. But I also like totally like agree with you for sure.
I also think like, let's not give people a bigger perception of what they have in those seats, because we elected them, but they also should be accountable to us.
Yeah, for sure.
And we shouldn't have it where they don't feel like they need to come back and check in. And because we want that conversation to happen. Because it's really important, right? Because I think that there's just so many when you think about where you live, right? Every neighborhood, there's the one person on the block that you always go to for the information, right? Because she knows, it's often a woman. Not always, but often. There's the one auntie on the block who knows a lot of stuff, right? And it's like, it's how to fix something or how to get something or where something is cheapest or like historically where something has been at. But there's also just like lots of people in the neighborhood who know stuff, right? It's like they're the secret keepers, or they're the knowledge holders. And so I think that we often are looking for these subject matter experts outside of our city, and we pay them all this money. And I'm like, we have them here.
Oh yeah.
You know, and that like we need to start exercising that here and pay our own people.
Right. And pay people.
Our people and invest here and keep our dollars here with our own people.
That's why I said like ways of knowing and lived experience is valid experience, and is really like where I think we could be getting to a lot of solutions to many of the issues that Columbus has. So like I agree with you 100% on that, and I would like to see more of that. And so I guess what I'm trying to ask is like, is that something that you would be like pushing for? It's like, why are we,
Yes, it's a yes, and because I think it's one, it's about hiring folks from here, right? And giving people more opportunities to be able to have more space to be able to give input, and making sure that the input, like sometimes we have it where it's like, okay, well, we've done this town hall and we've had this thing in a gym at a rec center on some far-flung side of town. And we've done this thing. We've talked to 2,000 people, or they've walked through a gallery. But like,
and
how
we had
meaningful?
It at 2:00 on a Wednesday when people were at work.
That part. And so, how did that show me how that actually plays out in the plan, right? Show me how that actually changed what we were doing in the first place. Like, show me how you're actually implementing that knowledge that people took time out of their day to give to you, because that was a gift. People gave you a gift. They took time to give you information. They told you about their history. They laid bare their experiences. And sometimes when people come to meetings, they're giving you a lot of their personal experience that has been hard or painful to give. But they're doing it because they're hopeful that will mean something for you, and it will actually enlighten for somebody else and make a lighter load for somebody else. And that it will change something for the betterment of the whole. And people do this so often. in these kinds of meetings. And then I just often don't think that we actually see change in the plans as they were actually laid out to begin with, like the plan that they actually had to begin with. And I just think that that's so disingenuous.
Do you think that there's like an issue with like measuring impact in ways that make sense? Or is it just that like things are implemented and they move on to the next thing without
I think it's probably both.
Yeah.
I think it's both. And I think that sometimes it's because it's hard to decide how you're going to, maybe it's hard to decide how you're going to implement some of those changes. And so one, it's about how, when we bring people to the table, having the conversation about what do you want to see, right? Like, you're telling me this, but how can we actually make a change that's going to really, like, what can we do and actually start drilling? You need time. Yeah. You need to be able to have time to drill down to what's going to be a meaningful change for you, right? Like, we're talking about this, but what actually needs to happen, right? You really need housing that's closer to your job, right? Because it's taking you too long to get from your job to your kids in the afternoon, and it's risking your childcare.
Right.
Okay. Like, well, how can we fix that? Right. We can fix that by making sure you have housing that's closer. We can fix that by making sure you have better bus routes. We can make sure that you have sidewalks to walk on so it's safer for you to get there. We can make sure that you have childcare that's open later, right? Like, those are like the end results that are fixable things. Like, none of those things are not fixable. Like, those are all things that can be fixable.
It's a solution for all of
those are solution focused things. But I think at this point also,
there has to be budget for those things.
They do,
as well.
But there's also things that can be done in a collective way. And I think that sometimes we don't look, because we're not looking creatively, or we can look more creatively. Where are the bridge builders, right? Where are the other options? And I think often we've gotten to this really linear, like, well, we can't do it this way because this is this way. We can't do it this way because it's this way. Where are the opportunities for connection?
Well, and I think it also like goes back to the conversation we had earlier around creativity. Like, instead of like talking about the reasons why we can't do it,
right?
What are the ways that we can do it?
Right.
And I wanted to ask you too about transportation, because that is another thing that people always want me to ask about. People want to see improved transportation. So like you talked about getting to childcare, all of those things. Transportation is all a part of that. So like, talk to me a little bit about how from your seat you would work to improve transportation in Columbus.
So I think it's a number of different things. Like, one, I mean, we really haven't ever had enough sidewalks, right? And we've passed rules so that kids can stand on the side of the road and wait for school buses, and we've had tragic accidents because of that. And like, we have to change that, right? Like, we have to find ways so kids are safer and people are safer. And every year we have pedestrians that are maimed and killed because they're in roadways and they're hit by cars. Like, we have to change that. But we also have to look at more equitable ways for people to get around. I mean, if you've ever had to be the person who's on the bus and doesn't have a car, it feels a lot different than a person who's driving in a car. Yeah. And Columbus is very car centric. And so we need to have other opportunities for people to be able to ride bikes. And there are some places that in Columbus don't have bike paths. And, in talking to some of the other area chairs for some of the other area commissions, there are just neighborhoods that are just very disconnected. And I think that there's some opportunity there that when we look at how development happens, right? We have developments of houses that are not interconnected, right? And if they had sidewalks that connected this development to this development, then you could get from one place to the next where you're not necessarily having to bike on the road, but you'd be able to bike on the back end of the housing complexes that have been built. And I think that should be thoughtfully put together. So when you're passing the legislation for these apartment or housing complexes to be built, that this is part of it. And in talking to one of the area chairs, she's like, I'm always asking them if they would be willing to have land annexed for, bike bike paths to be on the back of it. And I asked this of businesses and I asked this of housing complexes, and they're all like, yeah, because a lot of them, they have employees that are biking out to get to the businesses, and they know that it's not safe for their employees to get out there because they're on busy roads that just have a really narrow berm, and it's really hard for them to get out there. So I think that there's some creativity that we can have that we're not fully exercising. And it may not have to be all shouldered by the city. It could be something that's brought on by the developer, right? It doesn't have to be a ton of money if they're only covering maybe the part that's on their property, right? But if it's then strung along to the point where or they're putting into a fund, right, that is then put together and it's a much larger part of a chain, we could then at least have some kind of bike paths to get people from some of the farther edges of the city closer together, right? Yeah. And I just think that there's some opportunities there that we have not fully explored because Columbus is very, very spread out. Oh, yeah. And for people who are on some of the outer edges, it is hard to get in. And because there's only one bus route and it only runs a few times a day, or it's a long period of time between when the buses run.
Right.
And for people who then can't catch that bus because they couldn't get off on work on time or whatever else, then they're left walking on the side of the road, or they're crossing 270 with a guardrail at their knees. It's awful.
I've seen people, and it's like Columbus is growing to the level that those things cannot
sustain.
We have to have a transportation that matches the city that we are going to be and are. Absolutely. And not what we were. And so on that creative thread, I've one more substantive question that I want to ask you about. We talked about transportation. We've touched on food insecurity in our communities and things like that. I want to know how you would creatively think about the housing crisis that's happening in Columbus right now. What are the ways that you would tackle that as a council member? And maybe it's not even how you would think creatively about it. If there are things that you feel like are common sense.
Yeah, I think that clearly the accessory dwelling units. So let's break that down. What does that mean? Being able to use your backyard to add another housing unit, huge. Right? Yes. So, and why? Why would you want to be able to add an extra housing space in your backyard? Because I'll give myself as an example. My dad is 80.
Yeah, in-law suites.
Right. Mm-hmm. And so to be able to, I can't maybe add on to my house, but I would like them to live closer. And
a lot of people can add on to their garages.
Right.
And I was thrilled when I saw that. I was like, this is the type of stuff that makes sense in my everyday life.
And why does this make sense? Because I don't want my parents to move here and then have rent go up exponentially and then they can't afford it on their fixed income. Mm-hmm. Right. But if they're in my backyard, as a family, we can figure that out better. Right. Mm-hmm. We can try to figure that out better. And if they're in our backyard, I'm close by, right? Mm-hmm. Because at the end of the day, then my children can check in on them. I can check. My husband and I have already made that agreement, shared agreement that we want my parents to live close by and we want to check in on them. We've already made that agreement. But if they're there, they also have the security of having other neighbors close by that right. Those are our people, right? Mm-hmm. If something happened with my parents, I could call my next door neighbors in the same way that they call us about their people. So we can do that. That feels much safer to us than having them live at a nursing home or something else, right? So also for people, let's say when my parents can't live there anymore, we now have a housing space that's close. We live close to downtown. It's close to the bus lines. It's close to the library. It's close to the hospital. It's close to a ton of different things. You want people to be able to live close to its gentle density. So it's close. It's not adding on a ton of housing it's not too much on one lot, but it's adding a little bit, right? Mm-hmm. A little bit extra. And it's keeping people close to the resources that they really should have access to, especially for an older couple who probably should eventually not be driving in the very near future, right? And so, and then as they age, Now, maybe a younger person could move in, right? So we're thinking about generational wealth. Like we want our children to be able to have a stable place to live, right? I don't want them living with me forever, like, or a younger couple or a young family or whatever. Like now we have other options.
But there's research on this, which I'm sure you know about, like what it looks like for folks when they live intergenerationally and like the great outcomes that come with that. Well, and also what we've been talking about this whole time, which is like building community. So I think there's a lot to be said about that.
I mean, it really wasn't until like baby boomers that we started getting away from folks not living intergenerationally. And that's only in some communities, right?
Yeah.
Like in the Black community that I live in, right? The historic Black community, people have been living intergenerationally for a very long time, right?
Oh yeah.
And so that's not new on the Near East Side.
No.
And it's not new in lots of communities. New American families live.
It's normal.
Right? It's normal for lots of people.
Right. And for lots of reasons, right? Like my family and my husband's family, a lot of people will still talk about like when they moved up from the South, they would live with whoever was already here.
Right.
And even now when folks are, experiencing like transitions for, different transitions in life, whether that's for a new job or they want to move to a new city or like financial instability, like the choices are your family.
My dad talks about how our family made it through the Depression. It was like whoever had paid rent was who everybody else was moving in with. So
I mean, all those things are things that feel like closer than further away, right?
And especially now, and like my dad,
even climate, right? Yeah. Like we need to be like thinking about how we can get more people in places that are safer, right? In whatever way.
I think that also like it does other things. Like my dad grew up with his grandparents living on the duplex next door. My mom, my biological mother, lived with her mom living in a mother-in-law suite. My dad and stepmom had my grandmother, my stepmom's mother, living in an apartment. And then eventually when she started burning tea kettles, living in our house, and she passed away in our house, like my childhood home. Like, but that also meant that childcare was there were some answers for childcare that didn't include having to pay for somebody to come in and do that. There were answers for like dinners that when my family were working or somebody else was doing something, there was like some answers for helping out with other tasks. So there was like some shared work. Or other things, like my grandmother would talk about how they did canning together. There were other things, victory gardens and things like that.
Skills and traditions. And
so I think that there's a lot of space for that, especially, not in like this, we're going to pawn the kids off on the grandparents. That's ridiculous. But like, there is a sense of safety because there are other adults. It does take some pressure off, and it can really help families with traditions and have some outlets for other opportunities because you have more people there to help out.
Yeah, for sure.
So that's one thing. I think also just looking at what do we have available through city resources, right? Like utilizing our land bank properties in a way that values what we have, right? Not so that they can be turned into Airbnbs, but so that they can actually be fully utilized for people to move into and use to a better extent, so that we can have people be part of the neighborhood. And maybe they need to get built so that some of them are accessible for elders, right? So that they'll be able to be part of the neighborhood, because sometimes we have a lot of elders are really concerned about aging in place.
Yeah.
And so, but sometimes the house that they're in is not accessible. So then it's also like, well, how do we help them have their house be accessible so they can continue to stay? Right. And so what does that look like?
Especially the older homes with the staircases that just go straight up and are a million.
But what's available? Like what's possible?
What's possible?
What's possible?
Yeah.
And I think that we just sometimes we can look for new opportunities there and bring more things to the table. What's also possible between cooperation between Columbus and the other suburbs, right? Their folks are also struggling with job needs, career needs, and transportation needs, right? So how do we have better connections between us and the outerlying areas, right?
Yeah, more collaboration, more synergy,
right.
And like shared goals.
Right. Well, and we have children in the win-win spaces that are Columbus residents that are not benefiting from Columbus Promise, right? But Columbus City Council, like Columbus as a whole, has invested in Columbus Promise for Columbus City students. I'm grateful for that. I think it's great. But there's opportunity, I think, for us to help out kids who are Columbus residents. And how do we then engage kids
thinking about it as more of like a regional win than just for the people who live within city limits.
So I think that we need to be looking at it with a perspective of what's possible. Being fiscally responsible, of course, yes. But I think that there's a lot of opportunity, and having worked in collective impact, a lot of times there's opportunities that are just not fully exercised. Like there's just like, we don't need to be all things to all people, because there are other people at the table who know how to, or in the room who know how to do stuff. Let's let them be subject matter experts at what they know best. But let's bring them to the table, right? Yeah. And let's bring them in and have that conversation. Let's talk about it, right? Is it possible? Well, maybe not right this second, but is it possible in the near future? Very possibly, yes. Let's talk about what that looks like. So I think that we just need to see what's likely, what could happen. And I mean, as parents, right? Sometimes you have to acknowledge that your kid is the one who came up with the best idea. It's not always you, right? And you're like, damn, that is a really good idea. I wish I had thought of that, you know, and just acknowledging, again, checking the ego that it didn't come from you. That's okay.
Oh, yeah.
Because at the end of the day, we still got a really good idea. And so it doesn't always have to come from me. Yeah. It's just the fact that we came up with it at all, and we can move forward and we can do something better. And because people deserve that. People deserve to be able to have better representation. People deserve to be able to go home and feel safe and be able to provide for their families and to be able to, take care of what they need to do and eat and have the things that they need. And they need to know that their representation at the city level is there for them, and that there's a plan. Yeah. And I'm very plan oriented. I'm really future focused. But I'm also very action oriented.
Okay. So my last question for you is, your campaign slogan is "Count on Kate." So I'm not asking for campaign promises. I'm asking what can people count on from you?
To be accountable.
Yeah. Okay.
To show up. To be the person that who have I been? I show up. I will be there. I will be the person who has the open calendar. You will know where I am. I will have the telephone number that you can reach me at. I will be the person who is also ready to build bridges. That means that there are 5.7 million people in Ohio who are not part of a political party. We do not have time anymore to say, I'm not playing with that person because they're not part of my party, or we don't exactly match. We're not exactly the same puzzle piece. It is too chaotic at these other levels. Columbus has needs, and we are putting our residents first. That means everybody who lives here needs to make sure that they have representation. And so they need to be able to have somebody that they can call who's going to call them back. Yeah. Full stop.
Well, I appreciate that. And I believe you. And the reason is because for me, it's always what is a person's history and what have they been doing? And it sounds like, and not that it just sounds like I have actually seen this myself, seen you show up as a community member and as a neighbor. And so, I'm really appreciative that you came down here to talk to us, and that people have an opportunity to, not just hear from you, but from all the folks running, and that they'll have an opportunity to make an informed decision. So I really am grateful for you and for all of the service that you've already done in this community.
Well, thanks. It's an honor to serve. It's what we want. Every day I try to be the person that I want my kids to know, and know that like to see as a mom, right? Mm-hmm. That like I'm like, I can't show something bad because I don't want them to not be good people, right? Mm-hmm. Like I have to be able to honor that, mm-hmm. right? And so I just try to live up to like what I would want them to do, because Columbus is a big, small town. And like it gets around if you're not doing the right stuff. And so like I just try to do right the best that I can every day, because I want them to be able to know that like they have a good parent.
Well, and be proud of your we all will have a legacy, and it's like, what are you leaving behind, and what are you doing?
That's true. Yeah. So thank you for having me today. I appreciate your time.
Of course.
And what you do.
Thank you so much.
I'm glad you're my neighbor.
Me too.